Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraim Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. On this beautiful Saturday, October 29th, I have the pleasure and luxury of interviewing Dr. E. Scott England, who is a father, an assistant professor of educational leadership at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, president elect of the Illinois ASCD, and host of the podcast Anchored in Education. Dr. E. Scott England, who are you?
Well, thank you for inviting me on to Wisdom and Productivity. That it's exciting to be on the other side of the podcast and just to be able to share a little bit with you just about what makes me tick, who shapes, what shapes me, who shapes me. But who am I? I'm a podcaster. I am in search for whatever knowledge I can find. And I think that in that quest, it doesn't matter that, if it's about leadership, if it's about teaching, and to be quite honest, like lately it's carpentry because I'm remodeling an apartment. I've never done that before. And so it's, talking to certain people and what they've done. Just I am on a quest. Who am I? I am that what is it, a knight who goes on quests. That is who I am in the search for knowledge.
So tell us more about why carpentry.
Well, so when this is a new position for me, the assistant professor in Maryland, and whenever I relocated here, I was in search for housing, and it was still kind of at the height of the housing boom,
Mm.
and so everything was competitive. Like you put in an offer, and you're putting in the offer just to get into the game of bidding more, and so like we could put in an offer that was had 10, 15, 20,000 over asking price, and maybe we would get into the bidding war to go on, but most of the time they're just like, nope, you're not even close. And so what I could get close on, I found this like 2-bed condo, and it was affordable. I could jump right in. The only problem was it had been neglected for the past let's say decade, and that's being probably generous. And so it was a complete gut. No carpeting, no flooring. I went down to the subfloors. I got rid of all the trim, all the cabinets, all the appliances. I mean, you name it, I got rid of it. And but I'm really great at the demo side of things,
Okay.
but putting things back together hasn't really been anything that I've ever tried. But I have now. And I was fortunate to come across a gentleman that he helped out and being able to give some pointers. And he would tell me, like, I would send him a picture of something, and he's like, yeah, no, that's not what you want to do. And he's like, if you're around, I can come show you. Or he would just text what I need to do. So yeah, I don't know that this is going to become anything that I pursue
Yeah,
beyond where I'm living now. There's some very talented people out there that can continue doing the great work they do
absolutely.
in flipping and remodeling and renovating. That's not going to be me.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So, Scott, tell us about if you can walk us through your professional history up to this point.
Oh, absolutely. The trick will be to keep it kind of condensed because my professional trajectory, as you had called it, um, it started with straight out of high school. I was going to be a high school English teacher,
Mm.
and um, things don't go as we plan, and we'd like for it to. But I only stayed in college for 2 years, and I got my associate's degree, but then I was ready to move on in life, and I wanted to make money. I wanted to get to work. And so it wasn't until 8 years later I returned to university to finish my undergrad. And in that time, I was blessed to become a father, and watching just the development of my son, I still loved the English aspect, but now I wanted the elementary, like I wanted to be involved in those primary developmental years. And so I became an elementary education major and taught first grade. Had the opportunity before I became certified. I was a one-to-one special education aide with students for students with autism, and worked in a summer autism camp, and then became principal, superintendent, did those for several years. And then the pandemic really caused, I guess, the time to take a step back and reflect on what I'm doing, my level of happiness, my health. And when I took everything into account, then it was time to make some life decisions. And so I was in the first year of a new 4-year contract when I said no more. And so I stepped down and went back into the classroom last year and taught third grade, and had probably one of the best years in education that I had had. I mean, not easy. It wasn't easy by any means. It was probably one of the most difficult years. When you hear teachers right now saying like the work they're doing is hard and that they're tired and everything else, yeah, I saw it firsthand. I'm fortunate in that I don't know too many people that can say like, oh, you did an entire year in the pandemic as a superintendent, and then another entire year in the pandemic as a classroom teacher. And both came with their challenges, and both came with the rewards. But the hardest work by any means was third grade teacher, and the most rewarding work by any means was last year as a third grade teacher. But and I was really looking forward to continuing the work. I was in a great community in Northwest Illinois, Aledo, Illinois, Apollo Elementary, and I had good plans to stay there. But remember what we said, we have the best laid plans. None always go how we want. So when the position opened up at University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, a top 20 HBCU in the U.S., and they've got some great things going on in terms of partnerships, research activities, and everything else. And they invited me to join their faculty as an assistant professor in the Education Leadership Doctoral Program. I had to go back and forth. Like I don't know, it may be at home. Like I had a pros and cons between leaving that third grade job and joining this, but this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up.
Wow. Well, let's peel that onion. Wow.
Yeah.
That's an awesome story. Let me ask you, when you went back to college to finish your undergrad,
Yeah.
how do you think you had evolved as a student? How your mindset had evolved from when you were doing your associate and when you finished your degree? And I'm asking that because who knows who's listening to this, who have gone through similar trenches, and they might hear you and say, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, I mean, looking outside of like just the education aspect, like in that 8 years, I don't know if it was becoming a father, just life experiences. It was probably a combination of everything. The level of maturity and how I approached studies, like I was a completely different student. Like, I don't know, if we went back and looked at my GPA at my community college, it was probably pretty low, like maybe embarrassingly low. I'm not really that embarrassed by it because we know that GPA isn't always an indicator of success and of future what we're going to do. But when I saw that, and like I'm talking, it was maybe over 2 but under 3 for GPA. And I defined myself by that. And so I had sort of talked myself out, like whenever I came across something that was challenging because I did go to a 4-year university for just a semester. Before then I withdrew and went into the workforce, because if anything was hard, I would look at that and be like, oh, well, I can't do it because I have this GPA that tells me that I can't really handle difficult things. And then whenever I returned 8 years later, or 7 years later, whenever it was an understanding, like, no, I just wasn't prepared. I didn't have the mental aptitude, I guess, to really be successful. And I think that's a big part of what the difference was from there. But then I also look at it too, and I think this is important for your listeners to understand, that I beat myself up for many years, and especially like whenever I finally became a certified teacher, there were times where in that first year I was thinking, you know, I'm older than some of these teachers that have already been here long enough that they're tenured and they're mentoring me, but I'm older than them. And so like I was thinking, I just wish I would have done better in school. But then I began reflecting back, like if I would have forced the issue when I was 20, and if I would have entered the workforce when I was 22 as a teacher, by that 8 years later, I wouldn't have been teaching.
Mm.
And I think that that's important to know, is that, what I went through in the 8 years in the workforce. I mean, I worked in factories, I worked at TV stations, I worked in a hotel at night, briefly, and and but taking all of those experiences then shaped who I was as a teacher. I was able to better connect with parents. I could answer the questions to students whenever they say, like, oh, I'm not going to go to college, I'm going to do this, and be like, look, I was in a factory. These are same things we're learning today. You're going to have to put in at a factory, in some sort of context. And so I looking now, I wouldn't trade the 8 years in the workforce of the different jobs that I had for anything, because it absolutely shaped my teaching, my leadership, and humbled me greatly. And it's just, I'm so thankful for it.
It's so, thank you for sharing that. It's so interesting because everybody that I have known that have had anything in between they became educators, they 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 didn't appreciate it as much as when they became educators. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So one more follow-up question, but this
Yeah.
is like a trifecta. Looking back,
Hmm.
looking back to the future, what lesson you wish you will have known better when you transition from teacher to principal,
Hmm.
from principal to superintendent, and from superintendent back to teacher?
Oh, that's tough. So I would think that my the one thing that I would definitely tell myself is to slow down. Um, because that is the other thing that maybe I realized it too late. Once I joined the workforce, I absolutely loved teaching, and I loved first grade. I taught at two wonderful elementary schools, one in Arcola, one in Salt, and they were fabulous. The people I worked with, the leaders that I served under, amazing. But I always, in the back of my head, before I realized what was going on, I thought, oh, I'm behind the curve. Like I had always planned to, after teaching principal, superintendent, I had always planned to get my PhD. And I had it all mapped out. Like I was going to start teaching at 22. I was going to have my master's at 24. By 28, I was going to have my PhD. And that the things that changed, like I was 28, 27 or 28 when I got my bachelor's. Like I still stayed with the trajectory. The timeline changed, but I felt behind the curve. So I felt like I had to jump in and do everything right away to catch up. And in some ways I'm thankful to have it done. But like I was in I started my master's program that led to my principal endorsement, after just being in the classroom for a year. And then I finished that program in December, and in January started the superintendent endorsement. And then the PhD program came up, and so I actually did a specialist at Eastern and my PhD at Indiana State simultaneously. So I was taking
Wow.
7 to 9 courses a semester. And and again, I mean, nothing suffered, because I was ready to just devour the knowledge that people were willing to give. But at the same time, it really, I could have stayed longer in teaching first grade, and possibly it would have shaped different experience for me as principal. I could have stayed principal for longer, and like I didn't have to do everything in the timeline I did. But that's I guess I'm not complaining though, because I'm very happy with where I am right now. But I think that's just important to know that you don't have to do it as fast as what you think you have to do it. Like, do it as it comes up. And I think the other thing that I would tell myself looking back is that you're always going to have critics. Don't let that shape what you do. Like, if you want to be completely, ridiculous and dress up, like I'm thinking of a time where I was a teacher, and the school district for like teacher appreciation gave us these like fleece blankets, and they were really nice. And so like I took the fleece blanket and I put it around my shoulders, and I clipped it with a binder clip, and I found a crown, and I put a crown on because last name's England, and so King of England. And then I marched with my students in the hallway. And the thing is, to go back, so it actually tied in to what we were talking about in our reading class, and so it tied in. But what I'll never forget is, walking by a colleague, and I was having fun. My kids were loving it. They were engaged in what we were doing. And I had a colleague whom I respect greatly, but when she walked by, she goes, "Oh, you'll do anything to get people to look at you." And like, I don't know how she meant. I didn't really follow up, but I know how I took it. And so I kind of like, oh, I can have fun in my classroom, but like when I go out, I probably shouldn't. And so it's sort of, going back, like who cares what people think? If you're in it for the kids, if what you're doing is for the kids, it doesn't matter what your reason is, just do it. So that's probably one thing.
That's wise advice. Very wise advice. Thank you.
Am I allowed to give one more?
Absolutely.
Okay, because
go for it.
The one more would be then, as shifting into administrator, I flipped things and I became more serious. Not like oh my goodness,
like an ogre.
Yeah, not like that. Like I wasn't that cantankerous, leader or anything like that. But when it came time for participating in something that was fun, like I still was very reserved, and I probably could have had more fun. I did loosen up towards the end of leadership. People give me a hard time about my shirt and ties. That's me though. I wear a shirt and tie, but so I can still have fun in a shirt and tie. But awesome. I think those are the three things. If I go back, I'd tell myself.
Hey, amazing. Why we do this? Let's praise the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So Scott, reading good books, as you know, it is a fundamental part of, I guess, making it in life. If you have to give two books to two people that you love the most, one fiction, one nonfiction, which one would be those books and why?
So what a difficult question. And that, like, if I shifted the camera, you could see my empty bookshelf here, because I absolutely love to read, but they're all in the boxes that's back here. So they're not on the bookshelf, but I mean, I've got a 4-tiered bookshelf full of books. And so being able to pick one and then to say one has to be fiction, one has to be nonfiction, I struggled with it. But so the fiction book that I would hand somebody would be The Sneetches and Other Stories by Dr. Seuss. I have always loved, when my son was little, he had like the definitive collection of Dr. Seuss. It was like a book like this, and they were all, it wasn't your typical 30 pages. Maybe the story was in 3 or 4, but they got all of them. And we absolutely love The Sneetches, and it has such a great story of acceptance and diversity that it's just always stuck with me. And we don't have to get political. I don't want to get political, but we can't ignore where we are as a country. And I think it's like collectively we would all better ourselves if we could just sit down and read the Sneetches and be like, at the end of the day, yep, some look like this, some look like that, but we're in this together. Like, this is a beautiful world. We're beautiful people. So why are we going at each other like that? And I think the Sneetches is just one of those books that does it. So that's what I would pick for fiction. For nonfiction, I had an equal struggle in this because the majority of my books are probably nonfiction. And I recommend books all the time. Like, in fact, that was, I just finished up a class here at UMES, and every day, every time we met, it was get this book, read this book. And we had one day where we opened up by sharing, like, we all read these books. What would you share? And I wrote down so many great ones, but my go-to that I would recommend nonfiction book is called Turn the Ship Around. And it is by retired submarine captain L. David Marquet, and an amazing story of him being prepared to take over a submarine. And then 6 months before deployment, they said, you're still taking over as captain. Oh, but by the way, you're taking over this class of submarine, which is completely different. He knew nothing about it. And so the whole idea is it's about not inquiry based. It's about intent based leadership. And so, we think of the military, the Navy specifically, of requesting permission from the captain to do things. And he said, like, I know probably less than many of you who have already served on this submarine. Don't ask me permission. Tell me what you intend to do. And it really is shaped a lot in what I have done. Like, I don't want to be the leader that says, do this, do that. It's more, bring me an idea of what you want to do. Let me ask the questions. Why do you want to do this? How will this, improve student achievement, engagement, culture, climate? I can ask those questions, but it's your idea. And then together we learn and we lead together. So Turn the Ship Around is the nonfiction book I would recommend.
Turn the Ship Around. Thank you so much for that recommendation. Let me ask you a broad question. Who do you learn from?
So let me flip that back on you. And you ask a broad question. Let me give you an even broader answer. Everyone. And so let me explain that every interaction that we have, either face to face or even just in the same vicinity, we have the opportunity to learn from them. And so I want to take you back in a brief period of time. 3 years I lived in Rochester, Minnesota. And one day, it was just me. I went to KFC. And so, when you hear KFC, we think chicken, right? Like it's in the name, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I went to KFC. I'm waiting my turn. And there was I don't know if the right term would be distraught, angry. I don't know what he was, but it was a gentleman that was, just absolutely yelling and berating staff and everything else not because they were out of chicken, mind you, that's why most of us are there, but because they were out of macaroni. And it was like out of mac and cheese, and there has never been a time in which I went to KFC thinking I'm coming for the mac and cheese. Like maybe they have good mac and cheese. I'm not even sure that I've ever ate it. My daughter probably has, because that's really all she eats. But I didn't. Like, I'm going for like the chicken. But this guy was so angry because they were out of mac and cheese. And it's a silly story to look back on. But any time that something comes up, like I think back to that. And it was a great learning experience. Like, don't be the mac and cheese guy from KFC in Rochester, Minnesota, because there's going to be things they're disappointing, or, that we're let down. Maybe they even bring emotions that, resemble anger and everything else. But then we got to step back. Like, is it worth it? Is it worth raising my blood pressure? Is it worth, the stress and anxiety I put on myself because something that is out of my control anyways, has happened? Like it doesn't make sense. So, who do I learn from is really everybody. And maybe the conversation that I'm having with somebody, they're teaching me to be a better learner. They're teaching me to be more empathetic, and not directly, but indirectly, by whatever story they're telling, I'm processing like, okay, this is a learning opportunity. They're not looking for a response. They're simply needing to talk. I am fortunate you mentioned in the opening that I host Anchored in Education, my podcast. I selfishly, I host it because I get to talk to such fabulous people, much like you get to do. With the exception of today, I don't know how you got me. but no, I mean, I bring in these amazing people that they're doing amazing things. They have amazing ideas, just incredible knowledge. And then I get to learn from them and then get to reference it out. And like, I feel like once I have a guest, I've made a contact for life, that if something comes up, I can be like, oh, I remember when, we talked about this. I can reach back out to that person. Or there's even been times where I've brought up past episodes just so I can listen and be like, oh man, that guest was brilliant in what they said. I'm still referencing it. So who do I learn from? Absolutely everybody that I come in contact. Because sometimes, like the KFC guy, we, the people we come in contact, we learn like what not to do. And we just have to be honest that, all these times we're looking for, I want to model myself after them. I want to, shape my leadership or my teaching off of them. But then you also look around, you're learning, you're like, oh, I definitely don't want to do this, or I definitely don't want to do that. It's not even, I think we hear this. I don't want people to think it's negative, because it's not really negative. It may just be like something you see, you realize you don't want to do that because that doesn't fit you or your personality. And it's not, like you could try like flexible seating, I think is a great example for this, that there are people that nail flexible seating, and you walk into the classroom and it's amazing. I mean, their rooms look amazing. The kids are engaged because they understand. Then you walk into other classrooms in which they're trying to do flexible seating because colleagues are doing it, or there's an initiative in the school to push for that, but it's not them. And so they have to learn like, oh, I see the concept. This isn't for me. I'm going to do something else to maybe change up seating, but to have it a little more structured that fits me. So I think that is who and how we learn from people.
Amazing response. Oh my goodness, I can imagine us one day eating fried chicken and peeling the onion of the mac and cheese, right? Like how often people have a north, right? And we don't realize that they have this north. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm so impressed. Let me follow up this with then, who is or who are your biggest influences?
Oh, do I have time to read all the followers' names on Twitter?
Go for it.
The biggest influence, it depends on the arena. And so, like Dr. Ryan Donlin is one of the biggest influences on my professional practice in higher education. And I'm so grateful for the time that he has given me, that, prior to even making the leap into higher education, like he's always been there for questions like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this, what would you recommend? Or, can you take a look at this letter of application to this university and give ideas? I mean, incredible mentor, super thankful. When I look at, different innovations going on and partnerships within schools, and just life advice, Ken Wallace. I have called and texted Ken many times. I'm like, Ken, I've got this going on. What can you offer? And sometimes it's a text back, and other times it's like, this is a little bigger. I'm going to call you. And I mean, I know as soon as he says that, grab the notebook and the pen because he's gonna lead me to fill up pages of notes. When it comes to bringing about effective change in how you approach that, Tony Frontier out of Cardinal Stritch in Wisconsin, he wrote a book, The 5 Levers to Improve Changing. I totally bungled that title. That's probably not what the title is, but it has 5 levers in it, and I reference it all the time. And actually, that is a book that I have loaned out so many times, and it's so great that it actually never comes back. And so I then have, so then I have to get myself a new copy, which I'm faced with again because I've loaned it out yet again and it never returned. So, but that's great because Tony's message on how to approach change really shaped, kind of. I met him when I was a superintendent, I believe, and it really, like, there's a lot of times, like, just very quickly, he'll say, if you want to bring about student achievement, you're not going to get it by painting the buses brighter, and that's obviously a very silly one, but even the book opens with a vignette of, if you're a horrible cooker, if you're a horrible cook, investing $10,000 into a brand new kitchen isn't going to improve the taste of your food because you're still a horrible cook. You're now just a horrible cook in a beautiful kitchen.
Absolutely.
And I reference that all the time when we have these change initiatives and we're completely missing the goal on what we're trying to change. And instead we're polishing up something over here while, really the rust is that way. So, Tony Frontier there, if I'm needing that boost of, this is hard work. And I referenced so many times when I went back into the classroom, Chase Milkey out of Michigan, ASCD author, The Burnout Cure, amazing guy, emailed back and forth, had the opportunity to talk with him a couple times. Actually, I booked him when I was a superintendent to come speak to staff. And then I stepped down. He still came, and the staff there at that school had the opportunity to learn from him, but he gives such a great message on positive, just positiveness. And then, I think it's important, you got to have a finance guy, and Zach Stanifer out of Central Illinois, he's the guy I go to. He's not on social media. He stays pretty low, but if you ever had any sort of question on how pensions work and everything else, like, he's my go-to guy. And he definitely, he's influenced moves I've made, just in my personal life on what I can do. So that's just a quick snapshot of, but there's so many more amazing people out there that truly influence. Hopefully, later on I can throw out a few more names to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have some names. Check out those names. You never know if they might support you one day, either in person or intellectually. So this show is about wisdom and productivity. Let's talk about that second part. As you know, productivity is a tool for success, and the greats use it, but there's no one way to do it. What does it mean to you? And what can you share with us?
And looking at this and hearing this question, it's really trying, I think in order to be productive, you have to understand you. And so I am a procrastinator, and people always want to fix the procrastination side of things. But a true procrastinator will tell you, like, you can't fix me. You can try, but ultimately, I'm going to wait until the last minute to do something. And but it's caught me more than once, not necessarily in terms of failure, but in terms of unnecessary stress, unnecessary anxiety, and everything like that. So understanding that, I just got an amazing tip from a student of mine of an app, and the app is called Forest, and it is a time on task app, and it may not be for everybody because, like, it's, you have this imaginary forest, and you set a timer to engage yourself in an activity, and it can be from like 10 minutes to 2 hours, and you start that, and when it ticks down and you made it to 0, you get to plant a tree in your forest. And it's a simple thing. Like, that's not going to engage everybody, but what's very clever, I think, is that when I start the timer, and I typically do like 15-minute blocks, because I find that I can work intensely for 15 minutes, but then I need something. But you start the timer and you have 10 seconds where you can back out and cancel that timer. And then after 10 seconds, in order to stop it, you've got to click a button that says give up. And like, I'm not going to click the button that says give up. I will, even if I have engaged in a task that I absolutely do not like, I will do it for 15 minutes so I don't have to click anything that says give up. And what I have found is that when it ticks down to 0 and it pops up like I got a tree and everything, I still go for another 5 or 10 minutes off the clock, because now I have engaged myself. And so it's done amazing things. In fact, I've got another class starting in a couple weeks, and I'll be teaching a finance class. And so there's not any, well, I mean, there will be people out there that love the finance, and I love the finance aspect side of things, but teaching it, like, it's going to be boring. The content is what the content is. Like, I can't change that. It'll be up to me to make it engaging. The content is boring. My class will not be boring. Let me clarify. But in order to get it to that level of engagement, like, I'm not going to be able to wait until the week of and begin planning these lessons. Like, I need to be coming up with activities. And so, thanks to a Time on Task app, like, I already have the outline and the structure of what this class is going to look like and the activities that we're going to do. And so I'm super pumped to be able to share that. I definitely think, but again, it's taken me nearly 4 decades to figure out what, and I only came across it because of a student that absolutely fears procrastination, and she recommended this app, and I absolutely got it.
We learn from everyone, right?
Yeah, you learn from everyone, because that wasn't even what the class was about. So I think that's where we can start on productivity. You have to understand who you are before you can start doing anything.
Absolutely. So let's go with your email, your calendar, scheduling. How are you in that department?
Yeah, a lot better than I used to be.
Tell us more.
Yep, absolutely. I live on my calendar, and my Google Calendar. Now, I'm still working out some kinks, as you and I discovered this morning. Time zones. I've never lived outside of the Central Time Zone, and in 39 years I've lived in Central Standard Time, and now for 3 months I've been in the Eastern.
You just moved 3 months. Wow.
Yeah, I moved back in August. Yeah, so making some adjustments there, and how that works, because it has bit me a time or two. But my email, I don't like to see the number of emails I have increase to, like more than 100, which I know that some people, that's still way too much, but 100 is kind of like my threshold, and 50 to 100. So I use the folders that you can do in Gmail, and I've never really utilized folders, but now that I have started being able to put things in, like, if it's with my podcast, it's here. If it's, a dissertation that I'm chairing, it's here, or one that I'm just a committee member, I break it down, and there's times where it's broken down like greatly, but the organization is just, it's amazing on that. And then, like I said, the calendar, I love what helps me and the productivity is color coding. And knowing, like, everything that's gray is my podcast. Red is a meeting that I absolutely have to attend. Green is something that I would like to attend, but it's not going to be pressing. All of these things, and whatever colors work for everybody else. Blue is travel, since I travel back and forth to Illinois a couple times a month. And so that's what I do for email and calendar. And
Beautiful.
do we want to move on to the next? The next one is
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, in terms, obviously, to become I'm an aspiring superintendent. At some point, I aspire to being in academia like you. In terms of productivity, what advice do you have for aspiring superintendents? Meaning, how does your life change when you are in that world of being the superintendent from principal? And in terms of productivity, what advice do you have for someone who's going to transition into the academia world after being so long in the school world?
Yeah, well, I think that in order to have the best productivity, that it all revolves around the connections that you make. And in fact, just recently on the podcast, I had the authors, I believe you've been through Aspiring Superintendent Academy. Is that correct?
I haven't. I
Oh,
was
okay.
accepted one time, but then I had to make a
Okay.
pause for that.
Okay.
But you're talking
My
about,
apologies.
you're talking about Louisville,
I'm
I
talking about
imagine.
The Unfinished Leader with
Oh yeah.
Mike Lubafeld, Nick Poliak, PJ Capozzi. So they were recently just on. And in the book, they talked about shifting away from calling it networking to connecting. And it's a simple change of words, but like I can network at a conference and I can meet somebody and have a conversation, but if I don't remember their name, if I don't have contact with them beyond that, then I've networked. Connecting is being able to go back in and say, I call you friend and I need to, I need help. And all three of those guys at one point in my time, I have reached out with things as superintendent, like this is what my district's facing. What could you do? And they're able to answer, or they'll direct me to someone that can better answer. And so I think if you don't have those connections when you jump into a position such as the superintendent, your productivity will just look like a spinning tire. And we use the phrase all the time of, my wheels are spinning in the mud, but literally that is what your productivity will feel like if you're trying to do it isolated. And so that is the number one thing. Like, you can have the best color coding system of notes and stickies all over your wall and all of this, but if you don't have the connections of people that have served before you and have sort of created that foundation of leadership and what you need to be doing, like, you're going to struggle. And the same can be said as you make that shift into academia, that it's a whole nother pace that at times feels like a turtle. And at times you look up and you're like, wow, everybody is, almost to the finish line. I haven't started. So again, though, it's making the connections with the right people that can say, this is what you need to be doing. And so, like, I'm on a tenure track for professor. And so, like, going to someone that has achieved that tenure status and have gone through the process and be like, what do I need to be doing? Because I even talked with another professor recently on one of the committees that we were on, and she said, you need to be doing something, every month, every year to build towards this, because when you get to the, end of 5 years or 6 years, whenever you apply for tenure, it's going to be impossible to look back and think, okay, what did I do in year one? And she's like, it's possible you could do it, but the only thing I'm going to be able to offer you is a box of Kleenex, because you're going to be crying when you do it. And so, that really, again, it goes into the organization bucket of productivity.
Yeah.
And knowing, okay, I'm doing this and I'm going to put it into my teaching bucket or my scholarship bucket or my service bucket, but I've got to have them, separate and organized so I can kind of have it at the end, of
Yes.
creating my dossier.
So let me ask you one more question about that. So I remember when I became a principal, I had a sit down with my family and I said, okay, guys, this is how life is going to change. Right. So, like, I basically said, well, that is going to be more time working. Right. I cannot imagine what would be the conversation the day I become a superintendent. How was that conversation for you?
Yeah, well, it was, I guess it was one of those things. I was already, really involved as a principal. And so it was just the understanding that just because I'm stepping out of a specific building leadership role doesn't mean that I'm not going to be at every possible event that I can within the district. So, there was at the height of athletic season through the winter and everything else, like there was something almost every night. And so, but a lot of it is involving family. Like, for example, my daughter, when we were in the height of the pandemic and we couldn't have but like 50 fans in the building to watch our basketball games, and a lot of districts went to live streaming, we invested a great deal of resources into not just live streaming, but producing the best live stream that you could. Like, we had a 3-camera setup on the ends and video switcher and live. We were just a elementary district, junior high, but we tied in the scorers table and clock into our live stream, so everything was updated on. Like, it was the professional deal, and it took a lot of time investment, but just being up front and then including the family. So like, my daughter would go with me, and she would, by the time we were a month in, it's like, okay, here's your 2 camera bags, go to town. And, she would set it all up and she would know how to do the testing. And so, I think that is probably what my recommendation would be. Yeah, you're moving into something that is, it's more intense. It is definitely something that will take more of a time investment, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. Include those around you. And I think that it's important for your community to even see you are, you're human.
Yes.
You have family. You're a father, you're a husband, you're a whatever it may be, that it's important that they see you out there. Like, we are real people. And, it's just like, I saw a really cute video of this kid that saw their favorite teacher out at a restaurant and like was absolutely just flipping out, like cannot believe, because kids think that this is what we do. We live and breathe at the school, and that's it. And sadly, a lot of adults believe that's what administrators do. And really, as superintendent, I didn't sit around all the time in my office thinking, okay, how am I going to change policy now? Like, I'm human. I go out, I run, I eat out, I attend events with my family. It's important they see that. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. A few more questions. You are in the tenure track. I'm sure, have your stories about completing a dissertation. I'm sure you're now in part of your responsibilities is to publish something. What advice do you have as a writer for people that write?
Well, stay in your whatever interests you, and really look what's out there and see how can I contribute that is different than what is already there. Like, we are, at times you get into oversaturation of certain areas, and maybe you have a great idea for a certain topic, but how can you reframe and approach that differently that's going to engage from a different direction? And because I think, for one, it will challenge you as a writer, and that you are doing something that is causing you to kind of dig deeper and going off what is comfortable for you. And I think it's important that if we're going to become well-rounded in what we do, that you have to become uncomfortable at times. And so I definitely think that would be a recommendation. The other thing is you just have to you have to know you and your pace and what is comfortable for you, because in talking to two people I've talked to at times that have written and published several books. One of them said, when I write a book, it generally takes me about 7 days. And, I'm looking at the books that this author has written, like, how do you write a book in 7 days? And so when I heard that early on, I heard that probably like 6 or 7 years ago, I was thinking, well, unless I can write a book in 7 days, why bother? But that's not reasonable. That's what they do. The another author that I talked to, he said, when I have an idea, he said, I sit down and he said, I just sort of vomit the words out onto the computer and then shape it. I'm like, well, that's a graphic way of putting it, but like, I completely understood what he's saying. Like, he just has to get it all out. And, but again, so I'm thinking, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just, whatever's in my head, I'm going to type it out. Well, it doesn't work for me. And so it's finding what works for you. But I think that goal setting is huge. And I talk to doctoral students about this, that you have to have some sort of goal. It doesn't have to be a large goal. It can have a small goal. Like, maybe I'm going to write a paragraph today. Maybe I'm going to write a section. Those larger goals could be, maybe I'm going to write 3 pages, whatever it may be. You have to have some sort of goal. Otherwise, you'll just find yourself always coming up with a reason to put it off one more day. And so I think that's probably the most important, to, find your interest, approach it from a different way, but then find what works for you when you come to goal setting.
Beautiful. And talking about what works for us, we share a admiration for podcasts. Anchor in Education is yours. Tell us what happens behind the scenes. What is the purpose of this podcast? How do you get it? How do you get connected with people? You just invite them? What should we know? What advice do you have for aspiring podcasters?
Well, if so, I say, if you're an aspiring podcaster, definitely do it. But just know that there's a lot of work. there's a lot of work that goes into it. That you have I've learned quite a bit from you as far as getting things scheduled and everything. Like I'm going to start putting some of that into my practice. I love the scheduling system that you have out and the automatic emails that are generated with the reminders. Fabulous. I will be stealing that idea.
And I stole it from someone too.
Perfect. Well, and again, that's how we learn.
It's a cycle, right? A cycle of learning. Absolutely.
And so I appreciate the opportunity to briefly talk about podcasting, because it is something that I enjoy very much. My father was a country music DJ for 25 years, and it was in my first 18 years of my life that he was doing that. So I grew up in radio stations. I grew up, when he had bands setting up that equipment. So like that's of interest of me. And so I think the thing to know is that, like, if somebody's watching a video, and this is what I was told, and it rings true. Like, if I'm watching a video on YouTube and the video quality is kind of like, I'll suffer through it if the content's good. But if they're listening to audio and the audio is not that great, it's too easy to turn it off, because you're only engaging on that one medium, the auditory. There's no visual with it. And so make sure that you have good quality in what you do, and then put the time into learning the guest or the topic, or whatever the theme of your podcast is. Like, don't. And I say this because this is the mistake that I made when I first decided, okay, I'm going to be a podcaster. Get the equipment, turn on the microphone, and then, I'm just going to record. And it was a hot mess of just, what are they saying? And so, like a lot of, script out notes and, have an idea of what you're going to say.
Yes.
But yeah, the time that goes in. So how do I get guests? Well, so my podcast, Anchored in Education, basically says that no matter what we're doing, no matter who we are, in some way we're anchored in education. We've been through a school system. Even if it was a horrible experience, even if the experience was so horrible that we dropped out and we maybe went back and got a GED later or something, you still are anchored in education. And from that bad experience, let's learn from you. Or maybe you had somebody that inspired you into teaching. I talk frequently. Anybody that has ever heard me speak knows that my first grade teacher, Mrs. Kazel, is the reason and the person who I shape. My approach. I try to actually shape my approach to life around Mrs. Kazel. 80 years old, retired at like 70.
Yeah.
71, and I just ran into her a couple weeks ago, and just still, I mean, the same thing. But that's neither here nor there. But everybody is anchored. So I look for stories, and I look for articles, and if it engages me, if I want to find out more, I reach out to them, and
Beautiful.
we go from there. So, but it's a lot of scheduling too. Like if you're going to do a guest-based podcast, know that things will come up. For example, we can share again the issue on why we're delayed. I logged in, and I was on the StreamYard. It said backstage, and I'm waiting and everything else. I'm like, I can't believe it. I know I was pushing time, but I'm still a couple minutes early. And then I start looking like, oh, I'm an hour late because I'm in a different time zone.
Yeah.
And so know that's going to happen with guests, and have plans. Like I always sit on at least 2 or 3 episodes that I've written that are just for me. And so if something comes up, nothing is amiss in the podcast, because consistency is the other thing. That if you want to build an audience, you need to have a consistency. And so every Monday, new episodes are released. I have kind of toyed around with changing the date, but it would still only be once a week. But the thing is, no matter what it is, it needs to be at that same time. So then people are like, oh, it's Monday.
Yes.
Let's listen to Anchored in Education. So
Absolutely. No, the podcasting have found great tool for research, learning, but also as an artistic endeavor, right? To share your art to the world. This has been such a great conversation, Scott. Anything else you would like to share with the listeners of the show?
The one thing, I guess, and I think you had a brief note on it, but you can't do everything that we talk about. You can't be a podcast. You can't be a writer. You can't be a leader or a great educator if you don't look at practices that take care of yourself first. And we hear it a lot. And, again, some look at that like, oh, another person talking about self-care, but it is absolutely so true. I share, when I was superintendent, at 37 years old, I was on 2 blood pressure medications. And, I had always had great health before then, but that's what the situation, and it was more, it's not the position. Don't get me wrong. It is not the superintendent position. It was many factors that was adding up, because pre-pandemic, superintendent was the greatest thing ever. It really was. But, just the different variables that was in the role I was in led to that. But, really taking care of yourself. And so, to tie it into also productivity, like I started meal prepping. I always kind of laughed. Like I think one of my sisters might meal prep, and I kind of laughing at her, like who would do that? And then I started doing it, and now like there's no more bad decisions on like I'm going to eat out. Like if I'm eating out, it's because I'm consciously deciding today I'm going to treat myself and eat here. But it's not a decision I'm making out of, just forced, because I have the meal prep. So I think that would be the number one thing that I would give as far as the extra thing. Just take care of yourself. Find a way. Meal prep may not be it. Exercise may not be it. If taking care of yourself means sitting down on the couch and watching TikTok for 30 minutes as your way to do it. Don't care what other people are saying. Like, if that is what your break is to take care of yourself, do it. So that would be my final bit of advice, because we can't learn from you if you're not here to learn from.
Amen. Scott, this has been amazing. Now we are connection forever.
Yeah.
So guys, thank you for sharing all your recommendations. I hope you have a fantastic Saturday.
I plan on it. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And, spoiler alert, you'll be on Anchored in Education coming up down the road here. So we'll get that put together and we'll connect again.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone. Peace and calm.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulu.
And I love that production. Chill out.